Hello everybody, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host Chris, and today we're talking about one of the big ones, maybe the biggest one, Jack Kirby, or Jack the King Kirby as he was known in the industry. There's a reason for that. He was not only a pioneer, I believe him to be one of the pillars of the industry. I'm talking about people that were just so creative and had so much output and influence on the industry that they changed things after they came out. I'm talking about guys like Will Eisner, Osamu Tezuka, Mobius, and of course, Jack Kirby. So his output was very prolific. I think you could argue that he created an entire genre of comics. In 1947, he and Joe Simon created the title Young Romance, and believe it or not, there just hadn't been romance comic books before that. It was so popular. It sold millions of comics. So it's not what he's best remembered for today. That would probably be superheroes, cosmic type stuff, but it's definitely something he created that was just humongous in its time. But we're going to talk about his superhero work, and the reason for discussing him right now is that Jack Kirby was born on August 28th, 1917. So that means the week of this video's release, that would have been his centennial. It would have been his 100th birthday, and I wanted to honor and respect him at that point in time. In fact, if you look at my channel, I'm having a giveaway right now. One of my viewers will win this Jack Kirby comic, Fantastic Four number 45. That isn't in this video. Just look in my channel. I'm having a giveaway. All you have to do is comment in it, and I'm going to have a random drawing. Somebody will get this comic book. I just want to honor the man. I want to say thank you to my viewers. And when I hit 2,000 subscribers, I'm going to randomly choose a comment. Somebody's going to get this comic book. Jack Kirby. What can we say about him? Well, he was incredibly prolific. The dude was known for being able to create a comic book in a week. A comic book that was beautiful. And here's a list of just some of the characters that he either created or co-created. Wow. All right, we're going to jump to what's essentially the middle of his career, 1970. We're going to look at Amazing Adventures, Volume 2, Issue number 1, where he both wrote and illustrated a story featuring his co-creations, the Inhumans. We're going to use that as a lens to look at his tropes, although I think you could more accurately call it his various storytelling techniques. Let's jump into it. In 1970, Jack Kirby began to move towards greater creative control over his work, both with the art and story. This began in Amazing Adventures Volume 2, Issue number 1 in 1970. There, Kirby began writing and drawing stories focusing on the Inhumans, who he had earlier co-created with Stan Lee in Fantastic Four number 45. The first page introduces the cast and features a couple of Kirby's tropes. It's a splash page, and Kirby would go on to create many comics that would open with a splash page, only to then reveal a double splash page after that. He doesn't do that here, but it was coming. On page 1, we're introduced to the Inhumans royal family, who governs the Inhumans. The first trope we're going to look at is that of the hidden society. The Inhumans live in a city that's hidden in the Himalayan mountains. They call it Attilan, sometimes they call it the Great Refuge, but Jack Kirby continued to explore this idea through all sorts of characters that he both wrote and illustrated for. Characters like the Black Panther's Wakanda, Kamandi, the last boy on Earth, the Inhumans, the Eternals, all sorts of characters that he worked on lived in hidden societies. Just an idea he seemed to be fascinated with. Attilan was first mentioned in Jack Kirby's Captain America in 1941 in a backup story, over 20 years before it was reintroduced in the pages of the Fantastic Four. The name Attilan could be derived from the idea of Atlantis and the Greek word Atlant, which means bearer of the heavens. Anthropologists believe that the island of Crete was the inspiration for Atlantis, and in Greek, the island is spelled with a K. The inhabitants were called the Cree. Kirby later introduced the alien Kree, who were responsible for creating the Inhumans. In the comics, the alien Kree experimented on primitive humans, and if they're exposed to the alien Terrigen mists, they can mutate and get powers, like the Inhuman royal family. Not all Inhumans go through the Terrigenesis process. The Inhumans explore something Kirby was fascinated with, the links between gods and men. He explored it with Thor, the Celestials, Galactus, the New Gods, and more. The Kree were aliens, not gods, but they may as well have been gods, since they were so technologically advanced that they guided the progress of the Inhumans' evolution. Looking closely at Jack Kirby's history, it's clear he was fascinated with this relationship. In 1971, Kirby left Marvel to work at DC Comics. At Marvel, he worked on an ongoing backup story set in the distant past of Thor's home, Asgard, dealing with Ragnarok, the death of the old gods. And he then switched to working at DC Comics, where he created the New Gods, who were formed following the death of their old gods. Just look at these pages from Tales of Asgard, followed by New Gods #1, to see the similarity of concept. As a quick side note, in 1976, Kirby was frustrated that DC would not let him definitively end New Gods, among other concerns, and he returned to Marvel to create the Eternals, about the old gods now returning to judge the new gods. It forms an interesting 3-act story across 3 separate sets of characters at 2 publishers. Back to Inhumans, it's also worth looking at the design of leader Black Bolt. This is another Kirby trope. He was very influenced by Mayan and Aztec designs. Just look at Black Bolt's costume. Black Bolt is indicative of this idea, and more clear-cut examples include Galactus, the Celestials, and his work for Lord of Light for the movie Argo, which was actually never made. On page 2, we see that the Inhumans are being explained to the Fantastic Four by their leader, Reed Richards, which is really for the reader's benefit, because it's pretty weird that they're discussing something that they all know about. Human Torch is annoyed that they haven't mentioned Crystal yet, who is an Inhuman who joined the Fantastic Four, or, as Human Torch says, "She can not only control the elements, but she's my very own chick." The Thing complains that the Inhumans don't exactly tug at his heartstrings, but after Crystal says, "They're groovy, I love them all," Thing changes his mind and instantly says that they're growing on him. A lot of comics historians agree that the Thing is the character closest to Kirby himself. He has a similar background growing up in the projects on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. He had the same sort of tough life that Jack Kirby himself had. Kirby viewed him as Jewish. That was later established in canon, but well after Kirby had actually passed away. But Kirby himself thought of the Thing as Jewish, so it was definitely a character that mirrored his creator. The intro featuring the Fantastic Four is probably due to this being the Inhumans' first solo story. We then cut to the Himalayan mountains, where a small team of Chinese soldiers are searching for the hidden city of the Inhumans. One of them says, "Our orders are to seek them out." Believe it or not, scouts are actually a Kirby trope. Why? Well, because in addition to fighting fascism by co-creating Captain America, Kirby himself was drafted into the US Army in 1943 and literally fought the Nazis, and his specific job was that of a scout. When Kirby's lieutenant learned that he was an artist, he made him a scout who would advance into towns to create reconnaissance maps, which was a very risky duty. Kirby fought as an infantryman in the campaign at Metz, France, and helped liberate the town of Malbrook. It was there that he came down with severe frostbite and was taken to a hospital in London, where the doctors almost decided to amputate his legs, but he was able to recover. Unfortunately, the rest of his company continued on to the Belgian town of Bastogne, where they were killed. Kirby went on to frequently use scouts in many of his stories after the war and continued to fight fascism by creating demagogues like Darkseid, Dr. Doom, Glorious Godfrey, and others. By the way, Kirby's comics kept coming out while he was away fighting in World War II. That's because when he was called up, he created a backlog of a year's worth of comic book stories on top of his regular output at the time, so that comics could keep coming out while he was abroad. It established him as one of the hardest working and most prolific comic book artists ever. Back to our story, two of the Inhumans show up and warn the soldiers to turn away. Even when faced with their gunfire, they hold back from injuring them. Instead, Karnak uses his ability to find the weak spot in anything and karate chops the side of the cliff to create a stone bridge that allows the soldiers to flee. But the soldiers foolishly insist on fighting and dramatically pull out something they call an atomic grenade. Medusa pops up and subdues the weapon with her living hair, and their leader, Black Bolt, flies in and beats up the soldiers with his incredible strength. They're home protected, the Inhumans fly home, most of them on Gorgon's fairly ridiculous flying magnetocycle. But that's a Kirby trope. He loved drawing technology and machinery. He could count on seeing things like gears on top of gears, oscillating wavelengths, all sorts of strange chrome orbs. This was just something you could see in pretty much any Jack Kirby comic book. Some more of Kirby's unique technology designs can be seen as the Inhumans enter Attilan. A monitor in the background seems to be showing some sort of energy. Kirby's method of displaying energy was utterly unique and highly influential. It's one of his tropes, and it even has its own commonly referred to name, Kirby Crackle. Kirby Crackle is the name for his technique of clustering lots of black dots and then using the negative space within to represent cascading powerful energy. Black Bolt flies into his castle where he's greeted by his aquatic brother Triton. The caption boxes explain that Black Bolt's people know that the world is no longer as safe as it was in the past. That is the fear which daily mounts in this peaceful realm. The technology gap between man and inhuman is closing fast. The clash must come soon. Triton shows Black Bolt what worries him. See it for yourself on the detector screen. A missile with a cobalt warhead, and the great refuge is in its path. The Inhumans believe humanity has fired a missile on them and there's no time to evacuate their people. We then cut to a remote island where we see Maximus, Black Bolt's brilliant but insane brother who wants to rule the Inhumans. He surrounded himself with various monsters, fellow Inhuman exiles like himself, who tend to his every whim. A tree monster named Tiberius says, "Allow me to spray the air with your favorite scent, sire." And that scent is Maximus's own farts. Alright, I'm kidding, but it's interesting to note that Tiberius looks a lot like Groot, who we all know from the Guardians of the Galaxy movies at this point, and Groot was actually a Jack Kirby creation all the way back in 1960's Tales to Astonish number 13, where he first appeared as a relatively generic monster. Centaurus wonders what the Inhumans could be discussing as Maximus's missile heads towards them, revealing that this is Maximus's doing. Aeolus flies up to announce their second missile is ready to fire. Maximus notes, "Yes, but its trajectory will be as deceiving to Black Bolt as the first," which means he's found a way to make the missile appear to have been fired by a human nation, not himself. He also is confident that while Black Bolt will destroy the first missile, the second one will be a much closer call. Maximus's plan is to either destroy Attilan in revenge for exiling him, or start a war between the Inhumans and humanity, and then step in to take over whatever is left. It's in equal measures brilliant and insane. This is the second to last Kirby trope I'm going to discuss today, and that is one of family dynamics. He was interested in almost Shakespearean relationships with his characters, even his godlike characters, the new gods, the Eternals, etc. They would have relatable, recognizable family relationships with all the emotions like betrayal and jealousy and love and forgiveness. And that helped ground those stories. It was something that the reader could relate to even while cosmic events could be unfolding. Black Bolt does in fact use his abilities to deflect the missile. His main power is his voice, which creates insanely powerful shockwaves. So he normally stays stoically silent and allows Medusa to speak for him. He can also control electrons, which grant him the ability to fly, have super strength, and even remold matter. I'm not clear on how the voice powers and electron powers are tied together, but it all probably has something to do with his cute little tuning fork that he keeps on his head. Anyway, after the missile is destroyed, Medusa declares, "Only the Fantastic Four know of our location." And Gorgon jumps right onto that, adding, "They are outsiders! They can betray us! Look!" And he sees the second missile, but here's the final trope I'll mention. Gorgon's extreme facial reaction is something that Kirby himself would refer to as the maximum state. Just the extreme emotions that you could feel during events like an epiphany, or when you're facing the apocalypse, or dealing with some sort of transformation. A lot of these expressions look similar no matter which character is experiencing it, but part of that is what made Kirby's artwork identifiable as Kirby's artwork. The dynamic poses with forced perspectives, the cosmic backdrops, the contrasting and relatively normal family dynamics. It all helped make Kirby Kirby. One of the hardest working men in comics, who may not have been paid what he was worth or been as acknowledged in his own time as he should have been, but who has certainly been held as the standard by which other American comic artists continue to be judged. Jack Kirby created so many amazing characters, wrote so many amazing stories, and drew so many comic books that there's just a ton of material still out there for us to enjoy. He also did a little bit of work in animation, like Thundar the Barbarian. He did some toy designs, like the DC Superpowers collection. I loved those as a kid. Jack Kirby and me, I have an interesting relationship there in the sense that when I originally was introduced to his artwork, I didn't necessarily care for it. I thought that it looked kind of ugly and blocky and simple. And yet there was something about it that just sort of kept me intrigued. And I'd go back and look at it again and again throughout the early years of being introduced to comics. And over time, as I illustrated more things myself and read more comics to find the storytellers that I admired most, I started to recognize the power and the sort of functional dynamics that Jack Kirby would use. His work uses very simple shapes. There's lots of angular squares, there's circles, there's triangles. You can find these shapes within his work, and it's just got a power to it. You know, he finds a lot of shorthand to represent things like textures and muscles and facial expressions. But it's memorable. It's so memorable. And it just becomes very easy to read and to fall into that world. His work is just full of action. You know, it doesn't have the same sort of violence that a lot of comic book art can have. It's just more innocent. It's adventure. It's action. It's dramatic, and it's kind of lovely in its own way. I really think that Jack Kirby is someone that, if you're not already in love with, take a second or a third look, and you're going to find that he grows on you. It's amazing just how prolific he was, how fast he could work and turn out beautiful comic books. I love the man. He was a hero in real life. He was an incredible artist. By all accounts, he was an amazing family man, just an incredible individual, and we can all be glad that he left us with so much amazing material. I hope you enjoyed this brief look at Jack Kirby. Thank you very much for watching, and until next week, keep reading comics.